All right. So, do we have the Google Doc? I should have brought this up before we hit record, but that's okay. The
Yes, we have
document.
Google document.
Do you have that
Yes.
ready?
I have it ready. I can probably share
You want to share? Okay.
Yeah, I have to. I have like a little bit of a broken setup at home, like custom setup. So sharing things is not always the easiest. Let's see what I can do. We have that one, and hopefully
Yeah, I found the document.
you see a window now shared.
Yeah, I got it.
Awesome. All right, well, give me a second. All right, let's see. So currently, we've been going through different types of the list of different things an open source software might ask for assistance with, or however we would say that in English. Appendix 1, and we've become, I think last time we stopped at 17. Since last meeting, I added 2 points, one on mental health support and one on commercial services. Since Julian is here, maybe we start with the 20, and then so you can choose if you want to stay longer or not, depending on what's going on, Julian. And then we go through 18 and 19 and 21 afterwards. And then if we find time, look at some of the question marks we've left in the list earlier. And I think if we manage to finish this today, we are done with the appendix, which I think is the most interesting and part of the effort we're doing here with the Sustainability Working Group. And then we can go back to the requirements and the use cases and try to maybe do a sanity check there and take some of the points we have discovered on the ways. Does that sound okay with you guys?
Yep.
All right, let's jump right into the idea here. So at point 20, as Julian said, before we started recording, we met a while back, and the topic of mental health in open source communities came up, and that made, of course, me think this is actually something that would be useful to add inside adds to a list of things to ask for, types of help to ask for. Yesterday, we had a short session to try to expand a little bit on this list here. But before we go on to that, Julian, could you share with us, since you are our guest and in a sense the topic expert here, is some of the background and the ideas that we talked about, and so we can get a common understanding with what this is about.
Sure. So I think like the main reason this came up really was when we discussed sort of when this new law comes into effect and then companies start demanding this metadata from open source maintainers. That will put a lot of pressure on people, a pressure that previously wasn't there, in particular because the space that previously hadn't really been regulated suddenly starts getting a lot of attention and a lot of new expectations. And I think for a lot of people, the open source world and all the stuff they do is a safe space, is their hobby, is an outlet for their creativity, and a place where they go to be themselves. If lots of companies suddenly come and demand lots of things of you that you effectively don't really get anything in return for, then that can be quite taxing. And I do think that in particular in more high profile and sort of like more far upstream projects, a lot of the people that work on those projects, they're often people who do that out of a deep passion, and where they do it not because they you know, they're good at it and they get paid for it, but they do it because it's interesting. And if then some companies and some lawyers come along and make it all, you know, suddenly very high pressure and you have to give us these things, then a lot of that joy can go missing. And I see a few risks there, especially when you think that probably many of the people maintaining the really sort of at the very sort of like top of the river, you know, kernels, things like that. A lot of these people, they're probably on the autistic spectrum, or often are on the autistic spectrum, which means that they're super passionate about this. It's their special interest. They love doing it, which is brilliant. But they often also aren't as good as neurotypical people with dealing with change. And then it suddenly becomes really hard for them. And I think as a community, or as a community of communities, sort of, we need to be aware of that and able to help them with that and guard against that. So the problems I could see range from sort of people having their safe space, their like pet project, their babies like suddenly invaded by lawyers demanding things yesterday that they have to do. They might react in a lot of different ways. Some people will say, okay, great, pay me. But I don't think everyone will be able to do that for various reasons. Some people will say, no, you don't have to use my stuff. And, you know, like that's sort of a reasonable response. But other people might encounter sort of a lot of pressure that they feel. And then they might, for example, just stop and just kind of give in and find something else to do that is more fun. But I think that is kind of like the sort of like least damaging outcome that could happen in terms of bad outcomes. Like it could also be that someone table flips and says, okay, whatever, I'm just going to delete everything. And I've seen that happen in a community, and that's quite devastating when that happens. It wasn't open source, it was a tool for a video game, but if lots and lots of people's work, whether it's in a clear license, just gets deleted because the maintainer says, you know what, I'm done, bye, I'm just going to delete this. No one can do anything about it. That's not ideal. But other than that, it could get worse. So for someone who is really like strongly invested and it suddenly gets destroyed by, their feeling of being safe there gets destroyed by an external change that they have no influence on, and they can't cope, then that could lead to self-harm or worse, to suicide, because they might not know how to deal with this change and might not know how to talk to people about it. And I think that's something that we have sort of a responsibility to be aware of and try to avoid. So that's where I'm coming from. That's what we discussed. Of course, I'm aware that we're trying to sort of make a standard to communicate this information that people could use to help sort of communicate what they need. But yeah, so we've tried to kind of like come up with what could maintainers or contributors sort of say I need help with. But I think it's more far-reaching as well, so there should be some awareness. So that's where I'm coming from. But I also know that the document we're discussing, of course, is more sort of after this has happened, how can people communicate back the other way that, hello, I need help. But I still want to raise sort of, okay, this is something that might happen and might go wrong, and that would be rather bad. Yeah, so that's sort of my introduction.
No, it's all, you know, Perfectly valid, completely understand that perspective. The mental health issues aside, and again, I completely get that. But what you said about um, a maintainer just saying screw it and deleting everything, I could definitely see that happening.
Yeah.
And specifically, if that's a library, then that's going to have a cascading effect on all kinds of other stuff as well.
Yes, business continuity on the highest level for a lot of things, you know. Yeah, if I don't know, the maintainer of curl did that, I mean, that just oops.
Right, right.
Right, like
The thing that really made me think in our conversation that this is super relevant here is that you told me that in some places, at least in the UK, and I also learned that in the US, there's a concept called a mental health first aider. Could you just
yes.
quickly say something about that?
So from work, I have this qualification. Like lots of offices in the UK, typically have a first aid person, so someone who knows how to bandage a bleeding wound, or how to put someone in like a stable position when they faint, things like that. So your typical first aider. Germany has this as well, and so that's something that usually like a company of a certain size will get people to sign up. Now, I only know about this in the UK where I now live. Companies can also have a mental health first aider. So one of the bodies that offer this is an organization called Mental Health for England, and effectively, it's training where you talk about recognizing stress, recognizing signs of anxiety, recognizing signs of mental health disorders such as like people being bipolar, or other sort of mental disorders. Positive language around mental health, up to recognizing signs of self-harm and attempted suicide, and being able to help in as much as that you can provide them with ways of getting help. Obviously, like we're not qualified therapists, and we can't be, and we shouldn't be. And also, if this happens sort of in an office environment, you wouldn't intervene. If someone has a knife, you do not try to intervene to stop them harming themselves, because the chance of yourself getting hurt is too big. In that case, you just call the police. But generally, I think this is a really good concept, and it's being accepted. So in our case, I work for a software company with like in the 100+ employees region. And we introduced this during the COVID lockdown, so there wasn't really a real office at the time, but 3 of us signed up to do this across the organization, did the training, which at times was quite intense. And then people do actually occasionally talk to me. It's mostly people I talk to anyway, but they feel more comfortable opening up and talking about their problems, about anxiety, about things not feeling great, and what to do about that. So you learn sort of positive dialogue, you learn about active listening, you learn stuff like that. And I think it's really good, and it's helped me in the other communities I'm involved in as well. I play an online game on my phone that has a really active, large community where I'm involved in community building as well. And I do notice that people trust me more because I think I'm good to talk to because I have this training. So I think that's really useful. And I could see that being a sort of resource that larger open source communities could have as well, and probably already have in a way that I'm sure there are people who have training like this, who have qualifications like this, and who don't, and who act in a similar role already, because that's just their nature, because they're good at communicating, they're good at talking to people, they're good at sort of empathizing. And there are always some who are good at that, while others really aren't. And I think that's normal, heterogeneous combination of people in a community. But I think pointing out, hey, this resource is here, would be quite useful.
That is really interesting. The Well, I think I definitely agree on, for the large projects and stuff. But I don't even think it needs to be a large project. I think it just needs to be a successful one.
Yeah, no, I mean, um,
'Cause you can be victims
definitely.
of your own success.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's more things like, this is someone, if you think about continuity for a project, and all of the long tail that involves sort of like a small project being popular, it doesn't matter if it's the stress of that work getting to someone, or if it's their family, or if it's their like real job or something else, you know, poverty in their country, whatever. Um, if they if they start falling down a hole, then that'll affect their entire life. And then with like a hat for, if they wear the hat for, how can we sustain sort of this world, and how can we sustain that their contributions are there, and then companies who rely on that can safely use this. I would say, well, it's in their interest to help these people that do work for free that they rely on, so that they don't fall off the wagon, so to speak, or fall down a dark hole. And what causes that isn't relevant in that moment. It's just like the availability of resources. And if it's just like communicating, here are some, telephone hotlines that you can talk to. In the UK, it would be Mind, for example, as a mental health charity. I don't know what the US ones are called, but I know they exist. Every like most countries have them, and it's just being aware of them and being like, okay, this isn't weak talking about it, but like something isn't okay with me. This is no different than having broken my leg and now I can't walk properly. Like at the moment I can't think properly because like something in my psyche or in my brain is currently a little bit broken and it needs help, and that's okay, and that's not a weakness. And we need to raise awareness for that, I think, because ultimately it's not like a human thing to do. It's also, in terms of continuity for projects, it's really important.
Yeah. So thank you for these thoughts, and I think this is super relevant to add to this list here. We also talked a little bit on, is there anything beyond just having the possibility or ask for the opportunity for someone to volunteer being a health first aider, mental health first aider. Not entirely sure if we managed to find something that fits well into this category. First of all, I propose that strictly speaking, this is about well-being. It's not just the mental health. It could be also that you feel it's fun, the feeling of feeling welcome, or that you come out of an interaction with more energy than it's being draining, for example, is also things that can help with the continuity of the project. And one really interesting, not okay, that's wrong to say. One, maybe I should call it success story in the Perl community, is that we have a long tradition of having meetup groups, which basically started
user
with
groups.
User groups. It started with that in I think 2000 or 1999 or something in New York, and it became a phenomenon called Pearl Mongers. At the heyday, there were like literally like maybe 100 of them or something. I like a large amount all over the world. These days, there were a lot fewer, and one of the bigger one is the London Pearl Mongers, and
Yes.
they have two types of events. One is the technical one, and the other one is the social one.
Yeah. So we split it. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a really useful acknowledgement that working on open source is also a social activity. It's maybe even mainly a social activity, and there's one realization that I think is worth pointing out here, and that is when we make some code, some application or library or something that is useful, and others start using, and others start caring about, then we've create a situation where multiple people care about the same thing. And eventually people meet up because of they care about the same thing. And this is like a basic feature in how you make friends. So that's a common thing throughout a lot of open source communities. The people who are care about something and meet people who care about the same thing, they turn out eventually out to become friends. And in the Perl Mongers community and many other similar communities, there's a tradition, for example, that is, if somebody is traveling and that you visit the other communities and say, hello, I'm coming to the city now. Could we have an emergency social? Basically, find a pub and geek out over a few beers. And that's one of the really enjoyable things to happen. It gives people a reason to meet up and have a good time and tell stories and not necessarily talk shop or geek out on the computers. Of course, if you want to do it, that's fine. But the act of having traditions like this is super useful. But it also means organizing it is a thing, and having somebody like like in the London Pearl Mongers, the main guy doing that, his name is Imari. They call him the pub minion or something like that.
Yeah,
I think
he
that's an
calls
awesome
himself
name. Okay,
He
he's
calls
a pub
himself that.
minion.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if we can translate that into something which is let's call it not just Perl centric, but it's the concept is valid and sound. So I think that also belongs here. If you think about this as having thinking, if you want to improve the well-being of not only the individual's mental situation, but also the community's mental situation. And the same goes with, I'm wondering if also the idea of developer relations or DevRel might fit in here, and how to make people feel welcome and create good relationships with the people you are involved with or care about the same thing. And maybe even the DEI related stuff might fit in under this rubric. So I've suggested maybe that's worth it. Those are the 4 situations that we managed to brainstorm that I think would fit under here. So we're really interested in hearing what you're thinking on this, Steve. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I really like the developer relations, and I think there are just so many people who like the idea of open source, like the communal aspect of it, but don't necessarily want or have the technical abilities to contribute at a technical level. And that developer relations role, I think, is, especially as open source projects, the big ones, the successful ones, become more and more, the spotlight is placed upon them, and more expectations. I think developer relations is a phenomenal thing for people that want to contribute in a non-technical way and don't want to like create a lot of documentation and that sort of thing. I think it's phenomenal. DEI, I mean, I haven't been in a place where the inclusion of different types of people and backgrounds have not actually contributed to a better solution. It always has. So I think that's always good. Yeah, I think we can include these. One thing that I would like to, one thing I do think we need to keep in mind as we are building the specification is what kinds of things we can automate and what things are we going to be asking the maintainers to do. And this is obviously something the maintainers would have to do. And I think we need to be cognizant of, yes, the successful and large projects are going to be asked from outside parties to do stuff. This is more of a preventative thing. I do think that we'll probably need our own developer relations in order to speak to the maintainers, the existing maintainers, on why they might be interested in volunteering to do this, provide this information, as kind of a, you know, not a safety net, but as a preventative type of thing, right?
You always want like an ambassador to go and talk to projects, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
My impression is the movements around OSPOS is very much interested in this topic, how to reach out and have relations with open source projects. If we, I'm imagining that something like this would also help them get a constructive role in not just being a contact point or teaching the organization how to interact with open source projects, but also to contribute in a meaningful way on the topics that they care about anyway, or where they might even have some expertise. So for me, that is also an argument in favor of this, and maybe on top of this, it's maybe a more general observation is that the list in its whole, I think, is getting so good right now. I'm actually getting really happy with it as it is, so that it can function as a way to indicate for newcomers to open source of what are the issues an open source project might encounter, to get an idea that open source isn't just a source for components that you can use to drive a business and create value with. It's actually a living entity, and something that you needs tender care and love and attention in a way that you cannot get if you just buy a piece of software from a shelf in a shop and then just take it under your arm and walk home. The shopping mindset that is very common in the industries over there when it comes to software procurement doesn't really work with open source in my mind, and that's I think an incredibly important point to make going forward, now that basically a lot of businesses are forced to start thinking about their dependencies. So this might be, I think this has a role to play to make this whole list just a little bit more impactful. Yeah,
that's another thing that we should maybe discuss, maybe not today, but eventually. I was talking with I have a lot of relationships with all kinds of people, and I was talking to a director of product security at a really large software company, and because they do not have any other terminology to describe it, they refer to individuals as vendors. And we've probably all seen the one blog post a year or two ago, I am not your supplier. But I think that maybe as part of this effort, we can maybe provide some guidance on how you could describe a open source project without like shoehorning an individual into being a vendor or a supplier. So that's something we should probably discuss at some point as well.
Okay, yeah, I'll add this as a note in my notes here. Not entirely sure how we would do that, but
I don't know either, but it literally just came up yesterday again.
If I may suggest some language here.
Yes.
it's basically the relationship, right? Like if you buy a piece of software in a shop and you walk home, that's a purely sort of business transaction relationship. You don't really have a relationship with the shop. You give them money, you take the thing. But like using open source really is more like a friendship or even a romantic relationship that works both ways. So you have to invest in order to reap benefits. Otherwise, you're just sort of taking stuff and not giving, and then that relationship will crash and burn and end eventually, and fizzle out. So I think it's something around educating that it is not a relationship where you just take, it's where you have to give something as well. And
Yeah,
that
I have
might
two.
be just respect, or it might be financial, or it might be support, or it might be other contributions, like giving back, basically.
Yeah, sorry to break in. I wrote a blog post on this topic a while back. Nobody reads my blog, so but it got me to think about this anyway. So it might be. I think it's relevant here. One type of language I'm started using is to insist that these open source projects that you depend on are not third-party suppliers or third-party entities. They are second-party entities. You have a relationship with them. You have you care about the same thing, and the well-being of your partner, in a sense, in this relationship, influences your own well-being. If they have a really bad day at the wrong time, then you'll have a really bad day at the same time. So just starting to call them second parties would be progress in my mind. But there's also the idea that in a sense they are colleagues, even if they're unpaid, calling them open source colleagues, or it's not that. Maybe this is a weakness in the type of the language we have available to describe these kinds of relationships. But a partner or a colleague, I think, might work to underline that this is not a stranger in the sense that you are depending on. It's somebody who cares about the same thing as you, and in a real and meaningful manner that can affect your own value chain or your own business viability.
And the fact that there's real people behind it.
Yeah.
I say that all the time when I speak to sort of like new people to the industry that I train. I always point out that those people are real. They're just normal people, it's totally possible to meet them at conferences where they will be interested in you and they will remember your name. And I remember when I met Larry Wald's wife, Gloria, for the second time, like 8 years or 9 years after I'd met her for the first time, and she remembered me. And my mind was blown, and I was like, "This is wow!" But yeah, they're just people, and they have needs and feelings and thoughts as well. And I think we should treat them as such. They're not like really, high up entities, but they're also not some random supplier. They're just people. They do the things they do for a reason, and they can stop to do the things they do for reasons, just like us.
Yep.
Should we land point 20? See if we can. As it stands now, we have my proposal to change the topic from mental health support to community and mental well-being, or something else. And
don't works for me.
You might want to put the pub minion into quotes if you want to keep that wording. I don't know if that should go in a spec.
Pub minion.
Pub minion. It's like a social event coordinator or something, if you want like corporate language. I guess conference organizing somewhere falls into that as well, but specifically non-technical meetups.
Right. Yeah, this is covered in some other points.
Yeah, no, this is different.
I really like to have a little bit of a creative name or something like
playful.
This. A playful name, yeah. That's me. I'm one of those people who think that if you write something, it should be written in such a way that it's enjoyable to read. And this goes both for code and narratives and stories and documentation and standards. Standards that can be dreadfully boring, but if you add some humor or some wittiness and playfulness in there, it suddenly becomes like somebody will thank you silently, like, oh, thank you that you actually added something that is kind of a cheeky or funny or something. This is
at least hate you less.
Yeah. Mental health further. Let's. I think that's a term we can keep. Developer relations, I think we could keep. Pub minion, I think we should keep, but we can add the parenthesis there and decide if we want to expand on that in any related documentation when we make this into some JSON specification. Then the final question is the DI or project continuity. This is originally from point 4, which was about community building and management, which is more of cultural shaping culture, or the organizational parts on how to make a community work. Not entirely sure if diversity, equity, inclusion belongs in point 4 or point 20. So what is your opinion, Steve? Do you have any on this?
For DEI, I probably, well, it probably belongs in community building would be my guess. But at the same, well, yeah, probably community building.
I'm fine either way. So you get to decide, Julian, if you have an opinion on this.
Because I'm here.
Yes.
I don't have a strong opinion either way, but yeah.
I think it can go in both. You have arguments either way. It's important. It's like, I mean, if your project cares about it, then it's important to build around it from the start, being inclusive. But on the other hand, keeping it that way is important for mental health because it helps people not having to mask and being themselves, and that keeps them sane and healthy, and that in turn keeps your community healthy. So it really, and then that of course has like an impact on the continuity of your project. So it really fits in either, or maybe it needs to be in either, really.
Yeah.
So like,
so we have half a point from in each direction from Julian and me, and
be the tiebreaker.
Steve, I think you're the tiebreaker here.
I am not the tiebreaker. I'll flip a coin, man.
but you
can't it
kind
be both?
It's a question about redundancy and in the spec. I don't know.
Fair.
Should we call it something different if it's or
so what was it? It was community and mental health, right?
No. Community and mental well-being.
Mental well-being. Okay.
So this is more about making people feel happy. It doesn't have to be creating policies or having a structure.
Right. So I'm gonna say something, and I'm really interested in getting Julian's input. If you put it in 4, which is community building, that's more of a not preventative, but it's
forward-looking.
Yeah, forward-looking. Thank you. And if you put it in 20, it's more of a trying to prevent something bad from happening, or trying to make it worse. So it depends on the framing that we want to do. I think I'm more of the optimist, so I would maybe prefer the community building versus the reactionary approach to that, which would be to put it in 20?
Not sure if the reactionary framing is the best one here, because
Yeah.
talking about developer relations isn't reactionary. Pub minion
No,
is
that's not actually.
reactionary.
No, but the
No, but for
category,
this point,
wealth of well-being. I don't know.
We
it's
can
like
use
it's like keeping it healthy, whereas you set it up to be healthy, but then it's like a garden, right? You set it up to be good, but then you have to tend to it to keep it that way, which is not the building. It is kind of the management, but it's not management, because then you're top down. If you talk about management, then you have people pushing things down and influencing, whereas what you really want is encourage people to be good and to flourish on their own, which is different. That's sort of like getting people involved, whereas the other one is more like making sure they follow the rules. Like that's what a code of conduct is. That's what sort of management, moderating, and supporting is, making governance. All of those are sort of like someone is making rules and someone is making sure people follow them, which is good and important. But there's a point to be made that you also want people to intrinsically want to do that, and that's probably more what point 20 wants to do.
Exactly. So, Sally, did you put the DE? I'm trying to follow your train of thought here. So you've got DEI continuity.
Yeah, I just
in
changed that.
20, which is interesting because if you establish DEI, that's part of community building.
Yeah.
So is that kind of your thought process?
Yeah, right now I was about to ask if what you guys think on this, about this, because I don't like the word enforcement, but that's sometimes what you have to do. Like we have
maybe. Sorry, carry on.
No. Please go ahead.
So maybe instead of focusing too much on the DEI, let's focus on the continuity.
Right.
And DEI is we're just taking a part of culture that isn't universally understood as culture, because in some cultures in the world, it's not as highly rated as in others. So that's why we feel the need to specifically mention it.
Right.
But really, it's just about culture. So, and like ensuring the continuity of the culture that we've set out to have, and ensuring that a culture self-regulates, which is continuity, I think is probably what fits in with the health of a project.
Under point 4, we have a point called culture and conduct.
Yes, that's what I'm looking at. That's where I'm coming from.
Right.
So that's you're building that, right? You're setting out to build a positive culture, and as part of that, you set out some rules, as for example, a code of conduct, and then you think about how do we keep a ideally diverse group of people invested in this, and how do we include people, and how do we make sure that everyone is happy to join this, and then you moderate that, and so on and so forth. You recruit according to that, all of those things. But in order to keep that community healthy, you want to maintain that culture, and you want to be able to, the correcting bit is really the moderation. So if it kind of like steers off course, you want to correct it. That's the moderation in point 4. But encouraging the community to self-regulate and fostering the ability of it to self-regulate, and being positive enough in its environment so everyone feels the ability, feels able to self-regulate for all kinds of cultural aspects, not just the inclusion and the diversity aspect, but all kinds of cultural aspects. Like that is the health of the community, and then that translates to the people's well-being inside the community. So I think that does fit if you phrase it as community continuity.
Yeah. When you talk now, you use the word culture and culture continuity. I don't know if that makes sense. I think it does make to a certain amount. It does make sense. But I'm wondering, if we should try to pick a term that covers all that we've been speaking on now. What works best, culture continuity or community continuity?
I think community fits quite well because culture is just one aspect of the community, isn't it? And at the end of the day, you want your community in a form where it thrives to continue on.
Okay.
And you can achieve that by making sure everyone's happy.
Sounds good to me. All right. Any protests from you, Steve?
I think he's gone
Oh,
AFK.
I'm good.
You're good. And for point 20, the headline, community and mental well-being, is that better than mental health support? Or should we have a third option?
Yeah, I like that.
You like the first option? All right, then we do that.
Well, the one that's currently.
And pub minion was let's stand until we find something better or more funny or something like that.
If anything in that spec is allowed to be funny, it has to be that one.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we should add a smiley to that one. Let's see if we can find a check mark.
It's probably called tick.
Called OK. No.
It's called tick, I think.
I think it uses Norwegian search terms.
The checken.
Hake.
Ah.
So it worked with that. All right, so I think we're fine there. We have 4 minutes left before we're scheduled to stop. Should we leave it at this and then continue with 18 and 19 next time, or what do you think? Should we can? I think we can make 18 work. Just at the last moment, because it's a short one.
User support and answering questions.
Yeah. So this is the language that the chaos people used in their contribution list, a list of type of contributions that do not involve coding or require computer skills or documentation skills. I think, well, it is there because they made it a separate point. And I think it's worth saying that offering help in the form of troubleshooting support and other types of user support can be critical. But that means that you have a forum or something, or chat room or something where people can ask questions, somebody bothers to answer. Whether or not that usually I don't often see that as an actively acknowledged role. I'm not entirely sure that's a common thing or not, but it might be out there, and I can see that becoming a thing if I make a list like this. What do you guys think?
I've got kind of mixed feelings on this. I know it came from the Chaos group. However, who is the user? For example, am I asking for the end user of the software, or is this the developer that maybe needs support because they want to contribute to it, but they don't know how? Very different audiences.
Well, if this is a component like a library or something, and or a framework or something like that, the users would be developers.
Correct. But if it's an application that an end user would actually use, user support could be vague.
So the question is, do we have to look at if this is more of a product, an end product, or something that is a infrastructure or type of component activity?
Maybe, but it's something I think we need to maybe discuss next time. Okay. I don't think it's going to be a slam dunk.
Yeah, so let's put this as a question mark, and then we can try to think about it a little bit until next time.
Great. And Julian, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah.
I learned a ton, so thank you for your contributions. I truly appreciate it. Hopefully you can join us next time. But
I mean, this point is interesting. I might.
Okay,
This
awesome.
reminds me of all of the time I've invested into the Pearl tag on Stack Overflow.
Right on.
Right? Lots of us
Okay.
have
Awesome.
in a lot of places, so I think that's underrepresented in general. So
Indeed.
yeah, no, this was good fun. Thank you very much for having me.
Good.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thank
I hope
you
it was
for
useful.
joining us. All right,
All right.
let's
Cheers,
say
everyone.
that's enough. Bye
right.
bye.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.